Hola a todos, estamos acá en New Hampshire. En este caso estamos acá con Matt Saury, que justamente vamos a hablar, es parte de los libertarios de acá de esta zona, de la región. Así que vamos a hacerle algunas preguntas para tratar de entender qué es lo que piensa puntualmente él y lo que piensa el movimiento en general.
Gracias. I was an Air Force ROTC cadet in college, and I had a really good mentor who was one of our cadre who introduced me to some Milton Friedman, and I ended up voting for Gary Johnson in 2012, and first heard about the Free State Project in 2017 or 2018. I was kind of disappointed to seeing the way that the government was going, the way the country was going, and it seemed like the Free State Project here in New Hampshire was the best chance of really living out the vision of the American founding fathers. So I moved here in 21 after the shutdowns the year before in New York State. The cities were burning, the statues were getting torn down. There were COVID lockdowns, red flag laws in that state, and New Hampshire just looked like a beacon of hope from far away. And it's been wonderful ever since. So one that I think has been incredibly successful that I myself have not personally participated in, that I want to highlight, I think, is the Free State Food Network. They had an amazing bill get passed into law last year that removed the cap for homesteaders selling goods before any sort of state inspection or licensing. What this means that if you're a homesteader in New Hampshire, you can sell an unlimited amount of product without having to to satisfy the demand that's there, without having to get a license. It's moving the trust down between the producer and the consumer in the transaction. And it's just when I hear about acres of farmland being bought by China and Bill Gates, something like that gives me a lot of hope. And I know there was another bill signed into law just a few weeks ago that kind of reduced the same restrictions on homemade salsas, and just stuff like that. That gives me a lot of hope. Oh, I would say so. So we already have no sales tax, no income tax here in New Hampshire. We're getting rid of the interest and dividends tax as well, and just I think the thing that people here, at least I know for sure in Seabrook, need are ways to mitigate the property tax burden. That's where the challenge is right now, because we're already in like the second lowest tax burden state. I think we're like 5.7%. I think there's one state that's a little bit higher than us. And I think that's what needs to happen, is just making the government efficient to alleviate the property tax burden.
Okay.
It's fun, but it's a challenge. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. This is the best place on earth to be. I think he's a gift. I think he's given Argentina the leadership it needs at the right time. I feel like a lot of the ideas aren't really ready to be accepted by the mass majority of the public until a real time of need comes about, and he seems to be giving that leadership that's needed and being an example to the world as well. So I'm very grateful. I guess that's because he's also calling for peace too. Very grateful. I'd say we got of course there's Ron Paul, Milton Friedman, Murray Rothbard, Hans Hermann Hoppe, and Kurt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute. I think those guys are the top.
And why? Because represent the...
after years of kind of being soaked in it, you almost forget how it started, but you see the results. I guess that's I guess the results speak for themselves. Here in New Hampshire, we have the concentration. We're the #1 freest state in the country, #2 safest state. We just got ranked the #2 best state to live. If this is what following those leaders are getting us, then we should continue to get those results. I do recommend Anatomy of the State by Rothbard. That's pretty good.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bueno, en este caso vamos a tener otra entrevista más con acá uno de los miembros libertarios de esta región, que está particularmente influenciada por las ideas libertarias. En este caso con Will Against, y vamos a tener una conversación acerca de algunos puntos interesantes que nos gustaría que él desarrolle. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, anytime. I'm Will Aganis. Live here in Somersworth, New Hampshire. which is about 30 minutes up the road, and moved to New Hampshire in 2020, so late 2020. Yeah. I'm a plant manager at a company called General Linen. We do, we process linens for restaurants, tablecloths, napkins, things like that. Nothing exciting. But I think that it's more just about starting off by questioning government, right? And I enlisted in the Army when I was 19. I dropped out of school. This was 2009. And I enlisted in the Army as a cavalry scout. And when you're 19, you don't really think about that, right? But very quickly, I realized, I may have to go deploy overseas and potentially have to go kill somebody, and I don't even know why we're fighting this war. And so that led me down this path of questioning, why are we here? What are we doing in the Middle East, right? And a lot of the really influential to me people who were anti-war were libertarians. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And it was also around the time of Ron Paul's campaign for president. And so one thing led to another, and I became very anti-war. A lot of the anti-war thinkers were leftists, and I did not agree with their economic policy. And so I heard about these libertarians who were anti-war, who were anti-government, but also economically very laissez-faire, free market. And I was drawn to that, and one thing led to another. I started reading Ron Paul, I started reading Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman, and that just led me down this rabbit hole, and here I am today. I prefer Rothbard. Rothbard, yes. Yeah. I don't agree with Rothbard about everything. I think that he, this is getting very in the weeds, but he, his ethical framework, which is what him and Hans Hermann Hoppe, they call argumentation ethics. I don't agree with that, but I think that I would agree with probably 95% of Murray Rothbard. Milton Friedman, great, very smart guy, but he didn't have that burning hatred of the government that Rothbard did, and I feel the same way. He has these ideas about abortion and children that I don't agree with. I think that people sometimes misunderstand him a little bit, but those I would say I do not agree with. But man, he's so good on so many things. This guy's written 1 million books and 1 million articles, and so many of them are right on the money. And like I said, he really has that burning hatred of the state, of the government, and I can sympathize with that. One is education freedom accounts, okay? So I'm sure like in Argentina you have public school, right? And public school are paid for by your taxes. Well, in New Hampshire, we have this program. It's in some other states too, but it's a great program in New Hampshire where rather than pay your taxes towards public schools, if you're a family, if you have children, the state will give you that money that can go towards a private school of your choice, or it can go towards homeschooling. So it gives parents more flexibility. Rather than if you live in a town that has a bad public school, you can take that money and send them to a private school instead, which is great for families who normally couldn't afford a private school. So that's one big one, and I would say also constitutional carry. So in the United States, in the Constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, and the Second Amendment says that we have this right to own firearms and carry firearms. And in New Hampshire, they passed constitutional carry, which means there essentially are very few laws around firearms. Okay, so I could go to you don't need a permit, you don't need a license. You can go to a store and buy a gun and take it home that day. Okay, and a lot of people think, oh, this is the end of the world. There's going to be lots of gun violence, lots of shootings, and things like that. It's the opposite. New Hampshire has, I think, the lowest murder rate in the country. It's a very, very safe place to live, and I think that it's important that everybody has the right to defend themselves and the ability to defend themselves. I would say, just in general, in general, look, I'm a free market guy, right? I think that the fewer regulations you have, the better. I worked in the cannabis industry for 10 years. Okay, so I opened a bunch of cannabis dispensaries. I managed a lot of them, and it's a heavily regulated market. And I up close, I saw how the regulations helped the big businesses and hurt the small ones. And so the businesses consolidated into these, bigger companies, which I was a part of. And so I saw that up close, and I think anything that allows people to start businesses, hire who they want, with the fewest regulations, the better. Well, so I would say politically, look, there's not a lot of libertarians in the United States, right? I think the United States generally has sort of a libertarian undercurrent, especially with the conservative side of things. But there's not that many libertarians. So just being around people who share your values and are kind of working towards the same thing is really encouraging, right? And you can see some of these bills get passed, some of these politicians get elected, and it feels like, hey, we're actually winning, we're doing something. So, it's really encouraging, it's great to see. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, so Javier Milei, very interesting guy. I am not an Argentinian. I'm not an expert on Argentina, so I don't want to pretend to say, what's good, what's bad. But I will say that he is the most successful libertarian politician ever. That says something, right? And so I think there's a few things we can learn from that. One is that a lot of libertarians, when we talk about things, right? We talked about Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises, and most people don't care, right? We talk about things in this academic sense. But Javier Milei has this really interesting way of taking that libertarian message and packaging it in a populist way, right? By saying, you're getting screwed by the government, right? Rather than saying, well, let's look at the, certain economic metrics, things like that. It's like, hey, you're getting screwed, right? We need to get these guys out of here, right? What is it, afuera, right? So I think that's really cool, is the messaging, how he packages it. It's very accessible to your average person. Someone who maybe isn't a libertarian, but they feel like, hey, I'm getting screwed by the government. I like this guy. So I think that's really, really cool. My hope for New Hampshire is that it becomes so successful that it's a model for other states and other libertarians. Okay, so people around the country can look at New Hampshire and say, these guys passed all these laws that we thought were wacky, but it's working. It's going really well. So I think I think that's really, in broad terms, that's what I would like to see. Is we want to be kind of the shining example of what libertarianism can be.
Seguimos aquí un ratito conversando porque fueron surgiendo preguntas que nos quedamos hablando un poco en la sobremesa, entonces las quisimos grabar para que las tuvieran, pues nos parecían puntos importantes a destacar.
So the question is, do you focus on the Libertarian Party or the Republican Party as a libertarian? And I would say a lot of libertarians are split, right? There's a lot of people who want the Libertarian parties to be successful. I would say most libertarians want the Libertarian Party to be successful, but there's the other group that says it's not worth trying to use the Libertarian Party. It's better to work within the Republican Party. There are a lot of Republicans who have kind of liberty-minded values. Maybe they don't understand libertarianism, or they're not as into it as much, but there is a strong current in the Republican Party or Republican voters where they want to be left alone by the government. And that's really kind of the core of it, right? So you have kind of a built-in group of people who are receptive to that message, and also the political system in the United States it's kind of rigged. It's built so that it's really supposed to be two parties going against each other. Third parties, you don't get any attention. And I think the biggest example of this was Ron Paul ran as a libertarian in the 80s, I believe, and had very little success, right? Nobody knew about him. Then he ran for president as a Republican in 2008 and 2012. And it was probably the most important moment for the libertarian movement in the United States in our history. And that was because so many people got brought in because they saw Ron Paul on the debate stage arguing with people like Rudy Giuliani or Mitt Romney, and they said, this guy makes sense. But they wouldn't have heard that message if he had run as a libertarian because he wouldn't have been there. So in New Hampshire, most of the libertarians that are part of the Free State Project or endorsed by the Free State Project run as Republicans because it's just the nature of the game. It's a lot easier to get elected that way than running as a third party. There is a Libertarian Party in the United States. There's a Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, and they have very little success with getting candidates elected and also, unfortunately, getting attention and getting the message out. So the question was, what are topics that libertarians are split on? There's differences of opinion. And I think the ones that I feel like are not settled, that there's a lot of very good faith arguments on both sides about. One is about abortion. So, like you brought up organs. I think most libertarians say if you want to sell a kidney, you have the right to do that because that's your body and you own your body and you are the final decider on what you can do with your body. But with abortion, it's different, right? Because it's not about your body anymore. It's about you have another person inside of you potentially, and so it's a question of at what point does a fetus have rights, and does the mother have an obligation to take care of that child or not? And so you have some people, like Murray Rothbard is on one end. He believes that a woman has a right to have an abortion anytime. And then you have on the other side of things like people like Ron Paul who say, no, the mother has an obligation to take care of that child. It gets complicated when we talk about things like rape or incest or underage mothers, but I would say that is, that's it's still a point of discussion. Another one would be, the rights of children. Libertarianism is all about self-ownership and the ability to do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting other people. Well, the problem is that children can't really make decisions on their own. If a child's running out into traffic, you go and grab them, right? But you wouldn't be able to grab an adult. So, and I know this sounds obvious, but it's an important point of distinction. So there's disagreements about children and how you can raise your children, and at what point, would a parent be abusing their children or something like that. And then lastly, animal rights. I think most libertarians believe that animals don't have the same rights as people. But at some point, could a person abuse an animal enough to the point where someone else would be allowed to step in and stop them? Is an animal the same? Can it be treated the same as, this table, if I own this table, and so it gets complicated. So I would say those would be where libertarians disagree still to this day, and very strong disagreements.